Well, welcome to Adult Learning Center here at Christ Fellowship. We are in week 3 of Jonah and understanding ancient Hebrew literature. We're actually doing this recording because we lost video and audio in the middle of Adult Learning Center this morning with class, so you won't get the rich Q&A, but we will get the content here for you, and I think you will really enjoy this class as we continue this journey on learning ancient Hebrew literature. So I'm going to pull up my screen here. And as I'm pulling up my screen, what we're going to see, we'll go ahead and put it in full screen mode, is here in week 3, as we're proceeding, one of the things I want to remind everybody from the class perspective is our goal is to really enrich our skill set, develop skill sets that we really understand ancient Hebrew literature. And we're going to do that through creating, defining some tools, and then looking at how it comes alive in the book of Jonah. Really understanding how powerful and sophisticated and connected the ancient Hebrew author's message was and is, and how within that it's far from a primitive group of people trying to maybe just collect some ideas, but rather this is sophisticated material. The cookies are not on the lower shelf, they're on the upper shelf for deep study. But that's why the prophets who meditated on the scriptures day and night, they breathed the scriptures day and night, they spoke the scriptures day and night. As they did that, they saw the world through that lens, and so that they could share with other people, from young believers to maturing believers to super mature believers. That's the skill set we're excited to be able to grow in ourselves so that we may enrich our learning experiences and our ability to share with others and help people when there might be little tripping, awkward points. But when we read the scriptures how the authors intended them, not that much awkwardness, really. So we're going to continue to do this, and we'll just really have a rich experience with the book of Jonah as well. So we kind of went over how the Hebrew text came together, the Hebrew Bible. We talked about Tanakh. This is the organization of the Hebrew Bible that was Jesus's Bible, Paul's Bible, John's Bible, Simeon's Bible. This is the order that came about 200 to 400 years, kind of settled in before Jesus, and this is the order that the scrolls were organized as people spoke about the order of the scrolls. The Torah, the first 5 books, the Nevi'im, which is the prophets proper, and then the Ketuvim, which is the writings. Nothing inspired about the order, but it is important to note that this gives us little clues as we hear the New Testament writers writing things about, did you not read the law? That in that we get some really rich understanding of what they're referring to as Torah, or what about the writings, and what about the prophets, and how are they speaking to those things. So it really helps us see that organization did matter to how they looked at it. But again, once we understand these clues and build these tools we're talking about, the ability for each of us to be able to live with whatever order the books are in, but you start seeing the clues and the richness of the authors, the intent of the authors. Oh, such rich reading together. So today, we actually, because of an abbreviated class, we're only going to make it really partway through this class, which is part 2 of ancient Hebrew literature, and then we'll complete the second half of the class next week. Today, really, we're going to focus on building a motif, seeing how repetition really creates contrast or creates a solid point. And then we'll get into repeated words and things next week. And then after that, we will begin entering into walking through each one of the chapters of Jonah. So I'm excited to do that with everyone. As you may remember, last week we really talked about the stitching of the Tanakh, the scrolls. They didn't have a codex the way we do our Bibles. So instead of a codex, they had scrolls. So how would the authors have given literary hints and guideposts in their words to tell people, hey, this is connected here, this is connected here? And we read the beginnings and endings of the major books that end each one of the major sections: the Torah, Deuteronomy, Joshua at the beginning of the prophets, Malachi at the end of the prophets, Psalms at the beginning of the writings. And one of the things we noticed is as you finished Torah in Deuteronomy, you noticed that there was a very clear message that we still need a prophet to come, like Moses, but greater, who provides signs and wonders. And you look at the end of the prophets, Malachi, we're to be looking for a prophet like Elijah, but better, for restoration. And we see that these two are really about a prophet to come at the endings of the scrolls, but then of these major areas. And then you look at the beginning and Joshua, and we want to have a leader that exemplifies meditating, that is a breathing in and out, a speaking of the word 24/7, meditating on the word day and night. And they will prosper because of that, not because they're a mighty warrior, but because they are really view the world through the eyes of the Torah and of the Hebrew Bible. And we see here in Psalms, as it begins, we need to be looking for a leader that meditates on the word day and night, meditating on Torah day and night, who will prosper like David, but better, like Joshua, but better. So through these seams of the scrolls, what we really see is a job description for the Messiah to come that only one person has ever been able to fill out, and one God-man, right? Jesus was able to fill out this job description. And we better believe that all the prophets, all the writings saw these seams. And in the New Testament, that's how Jesus viewed things. That's how Paul viewed things. That's why they could say, this is not just the Messiah. This is the Messiah, not a Messiah, but the Messiah, because he filled out and exceeded this job description that they fathomed. So really neat stuff. We also saw how Jonah, as we got into that first sentence, and we didn't quite complete the first sentence, but we really saw how it's stitched in to like the scroll of the 12, because we noticed, and I'll come over here to Jonah chapter 1, it starts off with an and. Now, if you're in NASB, it says the word, but when we look at some other translations, we'll take ESV here, it starts with now. One of the key things to note is in the Hebrew, the actual Hebrew, there is a character at the front of the word, and what that means is that is an extension, and that character stands for and. So it says and the word. Just simply, while it may not be great English to say and the word starting a sentence, it does mean you're coming from something. And so you're seeing it's being stitched in to the prophets and the later prophets in the scroll of the 12. We also noted that in 2 Kings 2:14, as we read, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai. And we said, have we heard of Jonah before? Have we heard of Jonah, the son of Amittai before? And in 2 Kings, lo and behold, 14, this is Jonah who prophesied that the land would expand even to a bad king like Jeroboam II, because the cry of the people rose up, and we see the Lord blessing despite a bad king. And then we see him tell Jonah, arise and go to Nineveh. And that's when we said, have we heard of Nineveh before? And lo and behold, Genesis 10, we have heard of Nineveh before, because Ham, son of Noah, had a son Cush, who had a son named Nimrod. And Nimrod was the one who built the first kingdom, Babylon, and then he went right on to build the second kingdoms, which included Nineveh. And Nineveh is referred to as the great city. Well, interesting, because that's how Nineveh, that great city, the great city. You will see it here. The great city. That exact phrase is only found 2 times in the Hebrew Bible, Genesis 10 and Jonah 1. And so what we're seeing here is the author is getting you to upload at the beginning of this book, hey, this scroll that you just pulled out called Jonah, you need to have this story uploaded. You need to have this story uploaded. You need to be thinking about how these stories relate. And today we're going to go a little bit farther, right? And cry out against them, for their wickedness has come up before me. So in Jonah 1, we finished the last sentence of Jonah. But for their wickedness has come up before me. Do we have shelf space where wickedness or the blood of the innocent has come up before God and he has responded? We do. And so as we go to Genesis 4, and if just for a little bit of reference, what we see just before is this is Adam and Eve being ushered out of the garden. and they went just to the east of the Garden of Eden, just to the east. And outside of the garden, they're still in Eden, but they're outside of the Garden of Eden. They have 2 boys. And of those boys, one ends up being a keeper of the flocks, a shepherd, and one ends up being a tiller of the ground, a farmer. And it came about in the course of time, here in Genesis 4:3, that Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground, and Abel, on his part, brought the firstlings of his flock and of their fat portions. Now, interesting, why are Cain and Abel making offerings and sacrifices? This is way before Leviticus, way before any of those things. So there is something to this offering to the Lord. But the Lord had regard for Abel and for his offering. But for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. So Cain became very angry, and his countenance fell. Now with Jonah, we're going to hear in chapter 4, he doesn't like God's decisions, and he becomes very angry. And we're going to hear that's an interesting motif throughout the Bible. But what's interesting is the Lord then says to Cain, why are you angry? Which he also says to Jonah, why are you angry? Why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? Little hint here, and we could go over into the Hebrew just for time. I won't do that right now. But the countenance, really what that says in Hebrew is, won't exaltation be coming up from you if you do well? Well, that's an interesting guidepost, because that is hinting that while Cain brought an offering, something about his exaltation wasn't rising up. Maybe he was making an offering in hopes for something for himself. And maybe Abel's offering was truly just to exalt God. Something to think about. And something that might be clues as we're reading through Jonah and many other stories, that begins to say, interesting, what is the motives of our heart? I think there's some scriptures about motives of the heart, even though our outside actions may look good, our outside words may sound good, but what are the motives of our heart? There's something going on here. There's a big guidepost here. All right, so let's keep going. So then God says, but if you don't do well, sin is crouching at your door like an animal. Sin is crouching at your door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it. Now, God tells Cain he can master this crouching beast at his door, no different than he told Adam and Eve, that they were to rule over the animals. So the question is did Cain rule the beast of sin? He didn't. And it came about, they were in a field here in Genesis 4:8. And Cain rose up. Pay attention to that word, rose. He rose up against his brother Abel, and he killed him. So he did not tame and master over this beast crouching at his door, waiting to pounce. All right, so the Lord, when he asked Cain where he is, Cain kind of has a flippant answer about him. I'm my brother's keeper. God says in Genesis 4:10, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. So this blood of the innocent is coming up before us. This is a motif. Stay with me, because this really ties together, right? So he's cursed from the ground here. Now, what we see, you'll see here he is cursed from the ground, open its mouth. You will no longer yield its strength from the ground. You will be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth. So he's going to wander. Now, in verse 16 here, Genesis 4:16, it says, Cain went out from the presence, from the face of the Lord. Now, when Jonah was asked to do something for the Lord, did he run? Try to hide from the face of the Lord? Now, Cain settled in the land of Nod, but Nod it means the land of wandering. Pretty interesting, right? And guess where it's at? To the east of Eden. So here we are, the east of Eden. He's farther east. So he was settled just outside the garden, but he was still in Eden. Now he's going outside of Eden. Interesting. Or farther, I should say farther east of Eden. Okay. So as we're continuing this on, what happens with Cain? Well, he has relations with his wife, and she conceived, gave birth. And then what did he do? He built a city. This is the first mention of somebody building a city. So who was the person that built the first city? Cain, the murderer, built the first city. And look what happens here in 19. In 19, we see some lineage coming down from Cain, who are ruling these cities. And then we see Lamech. What do we know about Lamech? Lamech is the first guy in the Bible mentioned to have 2 wives. And we'll see down here, Lamech suddenly goes into a quote, and he said to his wives, listen to me, right? He said to his wives, listen to my voice, you wives of Lamech. Give heed to my speech, for I have killed a man for wounding me and a boy for striking me. If God protected Cain sevenfold, if Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech should be avenged 77-fold. Here we have rulers of the city that Lamech is 77 times. And we're just going to see this continuing, this snowball of generation after generation after generation, repeating and increasing the sins of their fathers. Not forced to, but they do it. That you do see this pattern. So what we're going to see, let me kind of fast forward. We're in Genesis chapter 5. This is a long genealogy, which is good. A lot of neat things in here, but we're going to skip through that, and we're going to come to Genesis chapter 6. And in Genesis chapter 6, what we see is, now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and the daughters were born to them, and that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men, now sons of God means it's Elohim, it's deities. So the angels, the sons, that's what it refers to when you see sons of God. The daughters of men were beautiful. They saw that it was good, and they took. This is like a direct copy and paste, if you will, from Genesis 3:6. I'm going to come back to Genesis 3:6. The woman saw that it was good, and she took it. She took it. So let's come back to Genesis 6 here. They saw that it was good, and they took for themselves. So God says he's not going to strive for man and also their flesh. Nevertheless, the days shall be 120 years. You may have been taught, like I was early on in my years, that 120 years was an expectation of the life of a person. We know there's several people that live past 120 years after this is stated. But this is 120 years before the flood. And so this is likely what we see is God saying, the blood of the innocent have come up before me. So if Cain, the murderer, and there's innocent blood coming up, and we just established Lamech as a murderer and the innocent blood and the cry of the innocent going up, God has said, you've got 120 years. Now, I would suggest as we read through the word, we'll understand there were plenty of chances to repent. People came and made fun of Noah, but they had a chance to understand and repent, but they did not. So 120 years later, there's a flood. Now, as we continue going along these paths here, we will see something about the Nephilim. We're not going to go into depths here, but one thing I want you to notice is they were mighty men, mighty warriors of old, the men of renown. Didn't we learn last week in 2 Kings 2:14 about a mighty warrior? Nimrod. Now, I thought they were all wiped out in the flood. Let's read this here real quick. This is pre-flood. The Nephilim were on earth in those days. And then you see almost like the prophet or the scribe giving the quilt masters giving a little quick commentary. Oh, also afterward. After what? Afterward. So interesting little guideposts that we've been learning about. But Nimrod was called a mighty warrior, a mighty hunter, a mighty warrior of old. So important to note that you're seeing this lineage. And so Jonah, the story of Jonah is tied back to this and now tied all the way back to Genesis. And we're still in Genesis 6, not even deep into Genesis at this point. So where are we at now? What we see is that you've got this regular thing where a human builds something. They start off in a good place. They build for themselves. They begin to take wisdom for themselves. It ends up in violence or innocence being hurt. And that cry goes up to God, and eventually God will rectify those things. Maybe not in our timing. I know we would like for our timing that when we see an injustice, we want it fixed instantly. But the hope and the joy and the richness that we see in the Word is that God will hold all things accountable, and we don't need to be that judge. So some interesting in a class that I'm taking, people from all over the country, you'll hear some really neat things. One of the things that really struck me was how folks from other highly persecuted nations know things happen, but the hope they have is while they know that they may not see the peace in their generation, they do hold the hope because they read the word that God in future generations will restore, and they see that. And so they hold hope for that, and they pray for that. Maybe, sure, in their generation, but definitely in a future generation. So it's neat to see those things. So let's fast forward a little bit here. So the Lord saw the wickedness. Now he saw it. So the wickedness had rose up, so that God saw the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and every intent of their thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. That's strong. Now what we see is the Lord says he's going to blot them out from the face of the earth. And then he says, for I am sorry. I want to show you something real quick on the word sorry. If I right click here, you're going to see a word naham. Naham. In Hebrew, you don't have vowels. So if I took naham, you see this word. So let me come over here. I'm going to come over to a Hebrew language dictionary, and I'm going to look up the word naham. I think it's interesting. We may, in different interpretations, see the word sorry, changed mind, regret. The root of this word naham, as you will see here, is comforted, consoled, express empathy. You will see here, change one's mind. You will hear Genesis 6:6, 6:7, which is where we're at right here. You will see where it also can be taken as grieved, i.e. be in a state of sorrow or regret over a person or event. Let me tie what's really neat about this to me. When I see the nature, the fullness of this word, and then we say, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Noah is actually the Noach, which is the same words used in Naham. But let's look up Noah. And what we're going to see with the word of Noah is it means rest, comfort. So God found comfort in rest with Noah. So pretty beautiful picture that's being in peace, which is being written. So there's an intersection. There's something here about Noah that we need to see. So let's keep walking down these scriptures here and see that when God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has done what? Has come before me. There's the same theme. The earth is filled with violence. Behold, I'm going to destroy the earth. So as we get there, let's skip down here that there's a flood. And I'm going to come here to Genesis 7:12. Genesis 7:12, what happened? The rain, the waters, fell on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. We're going to continue to build out this understanding, but in the ancient Hebrew concept of the universe, rain and water is not inhabitable by man. Not just rain, but heavy rains, right? And we will see the depths are bad. In fact, David Zinn taught on the underworld, and that's where you get into Sheol and some other things. And we'll cover that when we get into Jonah chapter 2. So you've got 40 days and 40 nights. Now let's fast forward post the flood. The ark is settled where? On top of a mountain. And on top of that mountain, what's the first thing recorded that Noah does? Noah built an altar to the Lord. And he took every clean and unclean animal, or every clean animal and bird, as a burnt offering. Now, we're never told in this story why God had him take clean and unclean animals. It's not a part of the narrative. But suddenly, as being delivered, he's acting like a Levitical priest way before there's Levitical priests, way before that. And guess what? When we burn something, what happens? Smoke rises up, and the soothing aroma rose up to God. And listen to this inner dialogue that the Lord has with himself. He says, I will never again curse the ground on account of man. For the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth. Wait, just a second. He just destroyed the earth for the evil of all the men. How many people are there right now? Noah and his sons and daughters and his wife? Just a few. And he said, for the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth. I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. So the same reason God destroyed the earth because of that evil intent that had gotten out of control. It's just a few people. And what does he say? That their hearts can't be there. But what's the difference between the evil before and the evil now? What has Noah done? He's offered a sacrifice. A sacrifice. So there's something about this intercession, this sacrifice, even though his hearts, even in our best moments, our hearts aren't pure. But as we have the intentions of meeting God and honoring God, he makes a covenant not to destroy the people. Let's draw a picture to this real quick. So I'm going to come over here. And so what we've talked about is you've got the Garden of Eden. There's an Eden set up. And then we've got this violence, this blood of the innocent, this cry of the innocent, reaching up to God. And then we see a chosen one rescued through the waters. Who was Noah? Was rescued through the waters. And then we see this intercession and this covenant relationship that also gets made with God. So one of the neat things that God sometimes makes a covenant on his own with man. Sometimes it's a dual, two-way covenant. This motif is going to get worked over and over and over. We're going to pick just 3 stories here. So what we just talked about was from the lineage of Cain and Lamech, that people became so bad that God had a chosen one that he rescued through the waters. What do the waters do? They killed everyone. But there was one that is rescued through the waters who offered intercession. From Noah, in this job description and template that's getting filled out, he offered a sacrifice. And God, in turn, makes a covenant. Noah didn't know that's what was going to happen, but it is what God chose to do from that. Because God has chosen to execute his plan through the creation of humanity. And if he depended on the intent of man's heart, no more man. No more man. So he is choosing to work through man and good men and women and people, mankind as they approach God. So let's talk about another story. Let's keep growing here, and let's go into the story of Abraham. Okay, in Genesis 12, the story of Abraham. When Abraham was asked to arise and go, where was he asked to rise and go to? A good land. He was promised good land. So you've got another example of the Eden setup. What was he invited from? Babylon. Tower of Babel, in the Babylon. He's comes out of Babylon, invited into a good land. And then there's a drought. And Abraham, bless his heart, says, there's a drought. Let me go down to Egypt, a city of blood. Let me go to Egypt to get my deliverance. And he does some pretty rough stuff with his wife, gives his wife over to Pharaoh. Nonetheless, the Lord delivers him through that. And what we see is, as he's delivered through that, he actually intercedes on behalf of Lot and Sodom by saving them from the kings. And the next thing we hear in the Abraham story, have we heard a story in a narrative in the Abraham story of the wickedness reaching up to God? We have. Sodom and Gomorrah. So let's go over here and let's go to Genesis 18:20. Genesis 18:20. And the Lord said, the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. So this cry has reached up, and entirely according to its outcry. So I will go down now and see if they have done according to its outcry. So a cry of the innocent, a cry of the wickedness has come up before God, and it has come to me. All right. So men have turned their hearts from God. And then what we're going to see down here in 23. So this is where God has invited, the Lord has invited Abraham, Yahweh has invited Abraham to come near to him, invited him into his counsel. And I want to be careful here. This is not a negotiation between Abraham and the Lord. The Lord has invited Abraham into a conversation. And in this conversation, as Abraham is conversing with God, he's getting to know God better. Through his prayer, he's understanding God in this conversation. He says, God, suppose there's 50. What would you do? Yeah. God says, nope, I wouldn't do that. 40? Nope. 30? Nope. 20? Nope. 10? Nope. You're getting to know me good, Abraham. Abraham stops at that point and doesn't ask for more. Now, this is a big deal, y'all, because in the Eastern culture, negotiations are tough and they're very back and forth. In fact, we hear about Jacob wrestling with the Lord. That's a negotiation. This is not a negotiation. This is learning and conversing with God. And through his meditation and through his conversing with God, he's learning more about God, which is beautiful. But were there even 10 righteous? We find out that there aren't. So as we come down into Genesis 19 here, what we hear, and as we come especially to 15, I want to call our eyes to Genesis 19:15. He said, take up your wife. They're going to be swept away. What's this word swept away? That sounds like a flood. Going to be swept away. But he hesitated. The men seized him and said, come on, let's go. Right? They brought him outside the city. And when they brought him outside, escape for your life, right? Let's see here. And the Lord's magnified. I want to make sure I get this here. It's down in 24. Then the Lord rained. The Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah. Again, this verbiage of waters. Something about these waters, although it's rained what? Rained brimstone and fire. Death. Again, when we see this out of heaven. So we're seeing this motif, and God delivers Lot and his daughter. So we're going to come back over here. We'll see Sodom, Abraham, and Abraham's intercession was through conversation, through prayer with God. And God says, I'm going to deliver them. All right, so pretty cool stuff. Let's move into the story of Moses now. Okay? So do we have a story here in Moses? I'm going to go to Genesis 47:6, where this is Joseph's met his brothers. Pharaoh has agreed, yes, invite them. Let's invite them to the best of the land of Goshen. And in fact, don't even just invite them, put them in charge of some of my stuff. So we yet again have an Eden-type setup. The Israelites are invited into this beautiful kind of, here, things are going to be good, right? And then what we see at the beginning of Exodus. Let me move to Exodus now. Exodus 1:22. We'll fast forward here. That Pharaoh commanded his people. Now, this is a new Pharaoh. The Pharaoh that invited is gone, and there's a new Pharaoh. He's scared of these Israelites. So what does he say? Every son who is born, you are to cast. I want you to really park away this word cast. We will see this in next week's lesson. Cast into the Nile. Every son you are to cast into the Nile, into the waters. Kill every son. and every daughter you're to keep alive. So we're going to kill the boys in the water. So we've got this water and death, but there's one little boy that was delivered through the water. So a woman bore a son, and when she could no longer hide him, she hid him in a wicker basket. Now, I'm going to right-click here just so you can see a really neat part of Hebrew literature. What are the authors really communicating? You're going to see a word, tevah. Tevah. You'll see it right here. See that word? Again, with no, it's pronounced tevah. Tevah means ark. Do you want to guess how many times the word tevah is used in the Hebrew Bible? 2 times. Noah's ark, Noah's tevah, and the ark. Now, I'm going to show you something just for fun here. I'm going to click on tevah. And what you'll see when it pulls up in the scriptures, you're going to see the story here in Genesis 6. This is the Noah story. Genesis 7, you'll get to Genesis 8, right? You'll come into Genesis 9. And then here you go. You got the Moses basket. Look at that. Tevah is used in 2 stories. So when you see these words, the authors are saying upload, upload the stories. All right, just some fun stuff. So let me move my screen here, and I'm going to cancel that search so we don't have that highlighted so much. All right, so she does that, and he's delivered through this basket. And ultimately, what does he come to do? He comes to intercede for the nations, right? So look out here in Exodus 2. So I'm in Exodus 2, 23 and 25. So let's scroll down to Exodus 2, 23 and 25. Now it came about in the course of those many days that the king of Egypt died. And the sons of Israel sighed because of the bondage. And they cried out. And their cry for help because of their bondage did what? Rose up to God. There's something about this motif I think we're going to be seeing in Jonah and in many other places. All right. And we again, if I remind us back in Jonah, how did it start? The cry of the wicked has risen up. It's risen up. Okay, so you have the cry of the innocent and the cry of the wicked that rises up before them. All right, let's fast forward here to Exodus chapter 7 through 12, and I'll just kind of hit it just real quick, but you'll notice that this is where the plagues start. So Exodus 7 to 12, God uses Moses to try to intercede for the nations 10 times, and they turn it down. In fact, their hearts get harder on that. Not just Pharaoh's, but the people's, right? And then what happens is Moses, because of his prayer and his conversation with God, he's interceding on behalf of Israel. And there comes a point which is interesting because Pharaoh finally says, okay, let my people go. And let's kind of fast forward to that part. And what you'll notice is we're going to be in another water scene. The Egyptians the Israelites are staring at a water, which we've already established means death. And behind them, who's coming after them? The Egyptians. So they have death in front and death behind them. And what did they say? Is this not the word that we spoke to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve in the city of blood and death than to die in the wilderness, in the tohu vavohu, which we'll come back to that in another lesson, probably Jonah 2. Interesting. But listen to Moses' words, because this is going to come up in Jonah chapter 2 especially as well. Do not fear, stand by, see the salvation of the Lord. He will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians who you've seen today, you'll never see them again. So there's some water stuff happening. So pretty powerful stuff here. Let me keep kind of working our way through here. I'm going to jump down now to Exodus 14, and we're in Exodus chapter 14 right now. In fact, I can just scroll to it. 22. Now, the Ruach, something swept. There's a sweeping, the Ruach, the breath of God. There was a wind that swept the sea back with a strong eastern wind, a Ruach, which can mean breath of God, can mean wind, several things there. And the waters were divided into what? Dry land. That's safe land, dry land. And the sons of Israel went through where the water was, in the midst of the sea of the dry land, and the waters were like walls on both sides of them. What happened when the Egyptians went in? The waters consumed them. Yeah, so waters, no good for them, right? So let's keep just kind of walking this motif. I'm going to come to a next thing here. So they get through this other side, they sing a song, and we're going to come back to that song in a few weeks. But let's fast forward to a mountain scene. So the Israelites get to Mount Sinai, and Moses enters a cloud of mist when he went up. And how long was Moses on the mountain? 40 days and 40 nights. I'm not trying to draw theological conclusions here. What I am trying to say is the authors are using words in this spare economy of words to ask the listeners to call to mind stories, connect these. There's richness in it. Y'all, we're only in Exodus. We're only in the second book of the Bible right now, of this, in the Hebrew and the English Bible, right? From that standpoint. All right. So he goes up there, but there's some impatience. Unfortunately, when we go to Exodus 32, the people saw Moses was delayed. 40 days, 40 nights is too long. Aaron, will you make us a god? Something we can represent, because that fiery cloud and stuff that's scary. But we can handle a golden calf. So can you craft so we can worship, put Yahweh in a box, if you will, and let's worship this golden calf, right? Now, there's a really key thing here in verse 6 and 7. Really pay attention here. So the next day, they rose early. Look at these words. These are not mistaken words. They offered burnt offerings to the calf. There's just a couple of commandments that they didn't have to break. And boy, they're breaking them right out of the gates. And brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink. And what did they do? And rose up to play. They rose up to play. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and said, hey, go down, for this revelry has risen up before me. They've corrupted themselves. Something about this motif, where there is goodness, you're invited into a land. They had just been invited, and they're still in the marriage ceremony with God, who they've said will follow all your stuff. They're breaking it already. That violence, that intent, that wickedness of the heart, they're breaking that. And now there's this all-consuming fire, and Moses comes down. And we're going to see some pretty beautiful stuff here. So Moses comes on down. I'm going to come down here to verse 11. Then Moses, let's come back up to verse 10. Now the Lord said, let me alone, so that I want to destroy them. They're just evil all the time. They're an obstinate people. They're wicked people. Then Moses prayed. He spoke with God. Oh Lord, why does your anger burn against your people whom you brought out? And he's speaking to God. And what's his prayer? God, will you remain consistent? Will you remain the same? Will you remain the same? And of course, God's answer is yes, I'll remain the same. And so he's calling out to remember what he's swore, these covenants. Remember I said covenant watchdogs for prophets? They're literally watching on behalf of the people and reminding both the people, right, of this covenant. And again, we see the Lord nahamed about his wrath, his harm, which he said he would bring upon the people. He settled. But he does say Now, let's keep going here. So he nahamed, but listen to this very, very important qualifier. I'm going to come down. I'm still in chapter 32, but I'm going to come down to verse 30 and 32. On the next day, Moses said to the people, you yourselves have committed a great sin. And now I'm going to go up to the Lord, and perhaps I can make atonement for your sin. Then Moses returned to the Lord and said, alas, this people have committed a great sin, and they have made a god of gold for themselves. But now, listen, verse 32, but now if you will, forgive their sin. And if not, may I offer my life. Please blot me out, instead. Now, he just amped it up. He wasn't just offering sacrifice or prayer and sacrifice. He offered self-sacrifice. Again, look at this job template that's getting filled out. Now, the Lord says that's not necessary. It's not necessary for you to do that, Moses. But he does say, listen, remember, he nahamed, but to an extent, because those who have sinned against me, he's going to blot them out of his book. At the time, the people, I told you, behold, my angel will go before you. Nevertheless, I will, in the day when I will punish them for their sins. And as we learned in Travis's class, that may not be kept out of heaven, but there is some gnashing of teeth even in the doctrine of rewards, as we spoke about, right? So some rich stuff here. Now, as we fast forward a little bit, when Moses is in conversation with God and wants to learn more about God, he says, help me see your face, Lord. And the Lord says, can't see my look upon my face. You'll melt. But as I pass over you when you're tucked in this cave, he passes over. And what does Moses hear? Yahweh, God, who is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in loving kindness and truth, who keeps loving kindness for thousands, who forgives iniquity, transgressions, and sin, yet by no means will leave the guilty unpunished, visiting their iniquity of the fathers on their children and their grandchildren to the third and fourth. There's a big contrast between forgiving for thousands and holding accountable to third and the fourth. And really, that's a Hebrew turn of phrase. The third and the fourth means that there is a tendency for generations to repeat the sins of their fathers many times. That's the third and the fourth. You'll see that all through different Hebrew literature. All right? So, why is that important? Because when we come to Jonah 4:2, remember I said these prophets were covenant watchdogs. They saw the world through Torah. Look here. And Jonah prayed to the Lord and said, please, Yahweh, was this not what I said to you while I was still in my own country? Didn't we just hear something about the Israelites saying, wouldn't it have been better had I stayed back in my country? Therefore, in order to forestall, to try to delay your goodness, I fled to Tarshish. We'll get back around to that in a couple weeks. For I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger, abundant in loving kindness, and one who relents concerning calamity. Wow. He just quoted Exodus 34:6-7, which is the reason why he didn't want to help Nineveh, because if they repented, he knew God would be a forgiving God. One just interesting touch point here is as we switch over to this other side, one thing that's really neat about this is the bookend. Remember, Jonah in 2 Kings 14 prophesies that the land's going to expand. Then about 120 years later, the Ninevites are overthrown. During that time, the land gets whittled down. The Israelite land gets whittled down. And then there's some new kings. And then we'll read something here in Nahum, right? And I'm going to go to Nahum chapter 1, verse 3. Nahum is saying, and he's calling out now, because the Ninevites kind of repented of their repentance. They repented when Jonah was there. And then 120 years later, they're back to their old ways. In fact, before that, they were, because they overtook some lands, and we learned about Sennacherib and different things. So Jonah's gone by now. But here's Nahum saying, the Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and the Lord will by no means leave the guilty unpunished. He's quoting Exodus 34:7 and referring back to 6. That's what we're supposed to upload into our minds. You'll see still imagery of storms and whirlwinds and things. So what these authors are asking the readers to understand, and what these prophets are wired for, is to help the people understand that as history is unfolded, as they looked at how God has interacted with the people through Torah, they continue writing and saying, if we continue to act these ways, the Lord will. And when others act these ways, the Lord will justify and rectify things. And so it's like you almost get these temporary glimpses of renewal, but then unfortunately man's heart starts that spiral right back. And then there's a quick little garden renewal, and then man's heart starts the spiral right back. Okay? So let me come over. So we're quoting Exodus 34:6 and 7. Let's have a New Testament moment just real quick. I want you to go to John 1:14. Now, John starts off, right? The Word, in the beginning, there was the Word, right? And the Word was God, and right? Okay. So now we're in John 1:14, just a little bit below that. Read what John writes. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we got to see. Did Moses get to see God's glory? No, you got to hear it. But John's saying we got to see his glory, glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. Grace and truth. The two bookends of Exodus 34:6 and 7. What John's saying is that they got to see Exodus 34:6 and 7 incarnate, that Jesus is the embodiment of Exodus 34:6 and 7. What a beautiful, beautiful picture. And I'll pick up here one, Psalm 85:10. This is within the book of Psalm. Remember, you've got several stitches going on, and I can show you a timeline here in just a little bit. But what we'll see is loving kindness and truth. What? Why are those words? We're back on Exodus 34:6 and 7. Have met together. Righteousness, which must be defended. Justice must make whole the righteousness. And peace. What? Righteousness and peace have kissed each other in a perfect harmony. Many of the prophets understood, and Jesus definitely understood, and when he described to people that we may see it as a tension. When injustice happens, I want that puppy fixed now. And we may see it at times as in one way, which God rectifies, but there's a perfect tension that God's forgiveness and his timing of these things is his, and it's beautiful. And he gives people multiple chances to repent. He sets the stopwatch. Well, you got 40 days, 40 nights, and then Jonah, what's his message to Nineveh? In 40 days. In 40 days. You're gonna be judged in 40 days. Jesus was in the wilderness for how long? 40 days. Again, not trying to make a huge theological point, trying to help you understand what the authors are saying as you are reading this. Have these other stories uploaded because they are tied together tightly. Okay? So let me come back over here to our picture. Let's fill it out the rest of the way. If you remember, you had Egypt. They were invited into the land of Goshen. Things didn't go so well. Things got bloody. You have Moses in a basket and a tevah, rescued through the waters. Ultimately, he ends up offering intercession and times for the nations, 10 different times. He offers intercession for the Israelites, which ultimately they end up getting freed. And he walks them through the wilderness. But then the Israelites kind of mess up with the golden calf. And now their revelry and wickedness rises up to God. And Moses again intercedes for the Israelites. And what we see, again, is there is a call to repentance. In all of these, there's a call of repentance. And we see that Moses had conversation with God and interceded through prayer. We also know that Moses offered his life on behalf of these things. So this motif, which we're going to stop on today, this motif is incredibly, incredibly important. I stopped here. We could have shared 100 more of these. But the point being is, you see these motifs. We haven't even made it out of Exodus yet. And the prophets, the covenant watchdogs, are seen and needing to remind the people that as they see how the people are behaving in comparison with Torah, what do we need to get back to? Now, there's something, I'm going to mention this in the next class, but I just want to say for many, we can struggle at times with the word law, because I think sometimes the word law to us can take on this legalistic standpoint, because we think of law and legal. I don't know if many of you know, my background's engineering physics. In that world, I think of laws as observations of how the universe behaves, and that then becomes a law, a principle, something you can't change. What's the law of gravity? We'll just keep it simple. What goes up must come down? Yeah. Unless there is a law of relativity, that there is an equal and opposite force holding it up, it's coming down. And so now you have the law of relativity. You have the law of thermodynamics. There are several laws that are just strictly what the prophets are saying. Look, Torah taught us that this is how life operates. And when we operate in our own wisdom, and when we operate in wickedness and violence, that God continues to show his character, no matter what the flaws of the man is. Because Moses was reluctant. Abraham had serious problems, right? Noah did not some great things at times, right? He was found to be restful, but look, right after the flood, they've got to back him in. So with each one of these things, it's not dependent on the intent of man. It's dependent on God's character to use that man who is, or woman, who is willing to intercede, who has a heart and at least good motives, right? So this is the God we serve. Watch this. If you will tuck these things away as we continue walking through this story, as you continue hearing Johnny teach in Isaiah, David teaching in Philippians, any of our teachers teaching, as we go through Jonah, you will see this motif, this repeated story. You're going to see it just popping off a page at you. When you read parables from Jesus, from Luke, from Jesus, that Luke wrote about Jesus' parables and different things, you're going to see again this imagery of water. And we're going to learn more in a few weeks about why such heavy imagery about water and death and submersion on those fronts. So I hope this is helpful. Next week, we're going to continue in kind of part 3, I guess, if you will now. And we're going to continue into these repeated words. And we're going to really focus in on this word hurled and cast. In fact, we'll do that a few other times. So I hope this is beneficial. I know this will take a little bit of time to kind of settle in. You can get to these notes by, I'll probably actually put the link below this so that you can get to the notes through the link, and you can upload these notes, or just text me or email me, and we'll get you the notes as well. These are all out in our Google Share Drive that you have on your normal notes. In fact, if you take a picture of any prior notes, that QR code, it'll take you right out there. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope this has been beneficial. I appreciate each and every one of you. I look forward to continuing walking through how these authors are using this very sophisticated technique to call to mind that when you read the story of Jonah, wow, you just have to have all these stories. And again, I don't want this to overwhelm you, The beauty of it, the richness you're going to experience in all your Bible studies, not just this one, all of your readings of the Bible will be enriched greatly. So love you all, appreciate you, and we'll see you this coming week. Thanks.